Hi, and welcome to my session at the 10th International Conference on the Future of Education. I'm Edward Saborni. I'm a professor of special education at NC State University. And so I'm going to show you my slides about the study that I conducted with my team. Okay, here we are. This is an examination of crime, violence, and academic performance in public schools in North Carolina. You see my name, you see my colleagues on my research team. The research questions are positive behavior intervention and support schools, PBIS schools, more effective in lowering student committed crime and violence at school than our traditional public schools in an entire US state. We've got all the schools in North Carolina represented in this study, the entire population of traditional public schools and PBIS schools. And then the second question is, what relationship exists between the number of student acts of school-related crime and violence at school and the global academic performance of the students at that school where those acts of school-related crime and violence are committed during school year 2015-2016. Here are the categories of school-related crime and violence. The State Department of Public Instruction has schools report to the State Department of Public Instruction whenever a student engages in any of these 16 categories of school-related crime and violence. You see some are crime incidents and some are violence incidents, and they're all added together and submitted to the State Department of Public Instruction as how many times this occurred per 1,000 students at a school. And here are the offenses. Pretty much the offenses occur under the following conditions and circumstances: on school property, in a public school bus, out on the playground, in the recreational area, or on school property in a school, off school property in a school-sponsored field trip. Global academic performance in North Carolina, every school has to report to the State Department of Public Instruction their scores on academic performance at the school, and they're given a school report card and a letter grade and a score too. And it's related to the school's overall academic achievement of all its students. And it's a combination of global academic achievement and yearly growth in academic achievement, and reading achievement and yearly growth, and mathematics achievement and yearly growth. That's what global academic performance at school is all about. And here are the 4 types of school that were used in this study. The total number of schools, 2,433. This did not include charter schools, but you can see how many traditional non-PBIS schools were included, over 1,800. PBIS green ribbon schools, that's tier 1 schools, they are numbered at 269. Model schools, tier 2 PBIS schools had 211 schools, and then the PBIS exemplar schools had 115 in the state of North Carolina during this school year. And the traditional public schools were nothing out of the ordinary. They were just the typical schools found in the state: elementary schools, middle schools, high schools. Some had mixed grade schools where they were K through 8 or K through 12, but they're all governed by the local school districts and by the North Carolina Department of Public Instruction. Now, the PBIS schools, PBIS is a framework that schools use to help students behave better. And these PBIS schools have been trained to use positive behavior intervention and support practices. And the green ribbon schools are at the tier 1. That's the lowest level of PBIS implementation. And it's what happens in a PBIS school is classroom behavior is closely watched by teachers and administrators, and students are reinforced for being good, following school rules. And not only are teachers reinforcing, school administrators are reinforcing, the staff are reinforcing students when they see appropriate behavior. And so everyone is involved in the prevention of inappropriate student behavior and providing reinforcement of proper school behavior of all the students. Here are the model schools. This is the second level. This includes everything at tier 1, the green ribbon schools, but it goes beyond that. Tier 2 requires more behavioral support training by a school teachers and administrators It offers a more comprehensive behavioral intervention plan for students. And this tier 2 is for students who were not successful at behaving quite so well at tier 1. So you can have at the PBIS model school level, tier 2, you have all the tier 1 services, plus you have all the tier 2 services combined with what's offered at tier 1. So it's a much more comprehensive behavioral intervention program for students at tier 2. Now in tier 3, or the PBIS exemplar schools, all the schools that are at tier 3 have been trained to use PBIS at tiers 1 and 2, but they also add level 3 or tier 3 to what occurs at the school. And tier 3 requires much more individual student behavioral support, much more training by the teachers and administrators. It offers much more comprehensive and individually oriented behavioral interventions for individual students who need more than just tier 1 and tier 2 services in order to perform well at school. So at tier 3 schools, all 3 tiered services are included. Tiers 1, green ribbon, tier 2, model school, and tier 3, which is the exemplar level, which is the most comprehensive of the 3 levels. So these PBI schools are a little bit different than the traditional public schools, which makes them very special in terms of what they do in the school. And so all 4 types of schools in this study in school year 2015-2016 included over 1.4 million students. So this is a huge population, not a sample, a population of all the students in these traditional schools and in the PBIS schools in the state. Here are the ethnic distribution of students at those schools. Primarily, over 50% were white, about 16% were Latino, about 26% African American. You can see all the other categories. So it's primarily white students in North Carolina. And here are the statistical analyses that we ran for the, with the data. We did some non-parametric tests, primarily the Kruskal-Wallis test and the Dwas, Steele, Critchlow, and Fligner non-parametric post hoc testing with the Kruskal-Wallis results. And then we used Bonferroni adjustments because of the multiple comparisons across these 16 variables. And then we did some Pearson product moment correlations to see how school-related crime and violence are related to school performance scores, academic performance scores. And then we ran some odds ratios as a measure of effect size, as you can see there. Here are the results. First, the 4 types of schools differed significantly on 5 of those 16 types of school crime and violence. The first category was assault on school personnel. Traditional public schools were significantly higher than all 3 types of PBIS schools. This is one of those violence categories. The second one, student possession of an alcoholic beverage. PBIS exemplar schools were significantly higher than all the other types of schools, which is sort of a little bit surprising. And traditional public schools were the second highest in student possession of an alcoholic beverage at school. Again, this is a crime category. If you look back, the first one, assault on school personnel, that's a violence category. Student possession of alcoholic beverage at school, that's a crime category. The next category, possession of a firearm at school, this is another crime category. The traditional schools were significantly higher than all 3 types of PBIS schools in this particular type of school crime and violence. Actually, it's school crime, not violence. The next, we see possession of a controlled substance. The traditional public schools were significantly higher than all 3 types of PBIS schools. This is a crime category. And then lastly, this is the 5th of the 16. This is the 5th of those 16 categories that differ significantly across the 4 groups. Possession of a weapon. PBIS green ribbon schools were significantly higher than the traditional public schools and the 2 other types of PBIS schools. Again, this is a crime category. So those are the 5 categories of school crime and violence where the 4 types of schools differed significantly. Also, here are the results for the school performance comparisons in terms of academic performance. Traditional public schools were significantly higher than the 3 types of public schools in overall academic performance during that 1 school year. And exemplar PBIS schools were significantly higher than the traditional public schools and the two other types of PBIS schools in both reading and math performance. So the traditional public schools did a little bit better in terms of academic performance than the PBIS schools. Here are the correlation results. Assault on school personnel was significantly positively correlated with overall academic scores on the school performance variable. A little bit surprising there. And then possession of an alcoholic beverage was significantly positively correlated with reading school performance scores and math school performance scores at a correlation, significant correlation of 0.90, which led us to ask the question, are these spurious? You wouldn't expect the higher performing schools in terms of academic performance to have higher rates of assault on school personnel and possession of an alcoholic beverage. So I put that question mark there simply to think a little bit more in terms of why these results occurred. It could be spurious, we don't know. All right, here are the odds ratios. The first two, traditional public schools versus all three public school, PBIS schools combined. There's no difference in odd ratios in terms of the total acts of school crime and violence. And then same with the traditional public schools versus the three PBIS schools combined. There's no difference in terms of total math performance scores. But for number 3 here, in terms of the odds ratios, a randomly selected traditional public school was significantly more likely to have higher overall academic school performance than a randomly selected PBIS school. And number 4 on the bottom, what this means is a randomly selected traditional public school was significantly more likely to have higher reading performance scores than a randomly selected PBIS school. So academic performance scores favor traditional schools over the PBIS schools, unfortunately, or fortunately, however you want to take a look at it. PBIS schools are better in lower crime and violence rates, but not in academics. Here are limitations. We didn't separate the schools into elementary, middle, and high school. Likely there are differences across the school performances when you separate them into these 3 levels. We couldn't do that. The data didn't provide those. All they did was provide all the schools and their names. And here is the results that we are reporting. We don't know whether these findings generalize across states in the United States. Could very well generalize across states, maybe not. And then PBIS is implemented in somewhat idiosyncratic ways across schools. So certain PBIS schools may have an advantage over others that does not show up in the findings related to these variables that we examined. Okay, sorry, I hit the wrong button. In the conclusion, school crime is more of a problem than school violence. The school crime categories numbered 6 categories. The violence categories numbered 10. There were 10 violence categories. But school crime categories, the differences were more prominent the differences across schools were more prominent in those crime categories in comparison to the violence categories. Violence categories, there were 10. Crime categories, there were only 6. And then overall, PBIS schools appeared better at controlling school crime and violence, and thus that serious student misbehavior in comparison to traditional public schools. And that's a notable justification for the PBIS framework. PBIS seems to be better at controlling the behavior. Not so, PBIS schools didn't seem to be so well in improving academic performance of students, but it certainly did control school crime and violence better than the traditional public schools. That's it. Thank you for your attention. I greatly appreciate it. I hope you enjoyed the presentation. You can email me if you have any questions. Thank you again.